Well, I, want to jump into our conversation. I'm really
Okay.
excited to speak with you because
Mhm.
I've never heard of Somawise. And
Ah,
I looked it up and I was like, wow, this is so interesting and so cool. I think the theme for me throughout this year, like the energy I'm picking up, is just this call to get back into the body.
hmm
So when I looked that up, I was like, wow, I cannot wait to learn more. So I have a host of questions, but first and foremost, I want to learn a little bit more about you and how you got on this journey of becoming a well-being coach and a somatic therapist.
So for me, how'd I get on the journey? It was a progressively deeper dive into the body. So it's you're feeling, you've talked about this feeling, this call to get back into the body, and I think that's becoming a popular sort of trend and people are talking about it a lot, and I'll get into more on that later. But for me, my first calling back into the body was I had just finished playing professional football. I was a quarterback for a team in Italy, and then after my single years, it was a very short professional career of football. I went back to LA where I grew up and I became an accountant. And it was within a few months of sitting at a desk that I'm like, why am I getting pain in my elbow and my neck and my back where I wasn't having these chronic injuries or chronic pains and aches when I was playing football?
Mm.
So it made me realize that actually, even though that I'd been trained and coached to become a professional athlete, I actually didn't know anything about the process. I didn't know anything about my body. I didn't know how I did it. And it was just a spark of curiosity that said, you know what, this accounting career is not for me. I lasted about a year behind a desk, and then I said, I think I'm going to follow this curiosity and passion for what's happening here and why is my body feeling this behind a desk. And so I became a personal trainer, and that was just the beginning. So again, progressively deeper dives. Every time I learned something, I realized there was so much more to learn. Like the more you know, the less you know, sort of thing. And after personal training, I went to massage school, got neuromuscular therapy certified, started collecting nutrition certifications. I was essentially just devouring books and courses and certifications, trying to learn everything that I could about what's happening here. Like, how do I take care of this, and how do I help others take care of their own bodies? Um, I actually opened up a wellness studio in Santa Monica, but I burnt out
Mm.
primarily because I had shouldered the responsibility of all of my clients' goals on my shoulders. I thought that I knew enough to help everybody,
Mm.
and it actually caused a really big burnout. And it wasn't until I was traveling around the world making documentaries that I stumbled upon Vipassana. And this is it's a 10-day meditation, silent meditation course. And even though I had previously been meditating, sort of like, people tell you meditation is healthy, so you do it, you experiment with it.
Mm.
But I wasn't really feeling the benefits of, like, I wasn't really feeling, it's like taking a multivitamin. You're told to take a multivitamin, but you don't really feel those immediate benefits. And it wasn't until I did one of those 10-day courses that I'm like, wow, this is the most powerful, transformative practice I've actually ever come across. And here I was not really knowing how to do it and why I was doing it. And it flipped the switch. So my commitment, or my sort of promise to never work with individuals again, that just evaporated. And I knew that my calling was, yeah, I can work with people again. The meditation practice showed me what was that missing ingredient.
Mm.
It showed me what was missing within myself. And again, while people think meditation is this mental activity or this mental exercise, in fact, meditation showed me the deepest way of connecting to my own body. So
Mm.
when you talk about this intention of coming back into the body, I think meditation and stillness is one of the bridges between the mind and the body, where we can really take our attention inward and begin to notice the different things that are happening within our body. So this became a academic and professional obsession. So I got a PhD in psychology, but I focused my research on men with pornography addiction,
Mm.
using meditation as an intervention for men that were struggling with their porn use. And the I guess the hypothesis of what we were really observing
Mm.
was, if people or men are reaching for porn as a subconscious sort of trigger, as a habit, then what would happen if we were giving them a practice where they sat still and they were able to feel and become aware of the impulses that made them want to go watch porn, and
Mm.
instead they were able to observe them and then choose how to respond in a different way. And I guess that was sort of the pathway and the bridge, not only between my own understanding of the body, but it was also what turned me to somatic therapy, where all of a sudden the things that I was doing, it was under the umbrella of health and wellness expert, lifestyle coach. And all of a sudden, because I was bringing in this new psychological awareness, all of the same tools that I had access to, whether it be exercise, massage, nutrition, all of these became a form of therapy because the intention was different. How I was utilizing them was different. How I was expressing and communicating to my clients about why they're beneficial was different. So again, well-being coach and somatic therapy, how did I get into it? It was the accidental yet destined progression of learning more and more about the body, from the superficial levels down to the deepest, most spiritual, fundamental levels. And you've talked about Muji, of course, right? This is the journey back into the body. It took me to an understanding of Muji. When I first started meditating and I listened to someone like Muji or Rupert Spira, because they both talk about non-duality, those words went over my head. I was like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And then all of a sudden I have this deeper connection with my body, and everything just falls into place. Every word they say, I'm like, wow, they're speaking truth. They're speaking something that is universally true of our experience, and it wouldn't have happened without that really deep connection here. So getting out of here and coming back to here. And I feel like I've talked your ear off. Maybe there's some question that comes up for you, but hopefully that was a robust enough share for you.
That was absolutely amazing. I have so many questions. I think the first thing I'm going to go into, just for the listeners so that they can understand what the whole conversation is going to center around, really what we've been talking about, getting out of your mind, getting out of your head and into your body, is that essentially what somatic therapy is?
Somatic therapy is essentially the understanding that intellectual understanding and talk therapy alone will not be enough for the process of healing. And a good example of this is many of the viewers or listeners that are viewing or listening now will have had the experience of reading a book or reading a quote, and they're like, man, that makes perfect sense. I get it now. And then intellectually they accept it. And yet, even though they've accepted it as truth and they have an understanding and the light bulb turned on, the healing isn't done, and all of a sudden we fall back into the same habits, we fall back into the same stresses and triggers, and it's one step forward, two steps back, and in fact we perceive ourselves to be worse off because here we go again, it's happening again, and we don't think we're actually progressing. So somatic therapy is the appreciation that the body also plays a role in the healing process. So the metaphor I use is the talk therapy and the intellectual understanding is like turning on the light of a room. But when you turn on the light of a dark room, there's still a mess to be cleaned up. And somatic therapy, the work of the body, is getting that messy room cleaned.
I love what you just said, that the body is a part of the healing, because I think in our culture we're so focused on talk therapy and getting in control of your mind, and intuitively I've always felt like there's something missing. I wasn't sure exactly what it was, but I'm just kind of like, yes, we talk about talk therapy, overcoming the mind and not giving into negative self-talk, but I just felt like there was another part that was missing from the puzzle in order to kind of get you to that next step of healing or breaking addictions or, healing trauma and all of that stuff. So I want to kind of go back to what you were talking about, working with men with the addiction to pornography, and through meditation kind of using that as a tool to help them kind of control those impulses. Can you talk a little bit deeper on how that worked?
Yeah, well, so what most people don't understand is it's like a coin. On one side of the coin is a thought. On the other side of the coin is some sensation that's happening in the body. At any given point, both are happening. So if we find ourselves ruminating on thoughts that are either fear-inducing or anxiety-provoking, if we get stuck in the thought, it's going to keep going and going and going, and we're going to find a million things to be anxious or scared about. And that tends to be what happens with a lot of people who ruminate in their minds. Instead, if we flip the coin around and say, well, if this is what's happening in my mind, what's happening in my body? And what we tend to find is tension or constriction or an emotion or some kind of discomfort that we're avoiding. So the mind, what it's trying to do is finding a solution for an internal discomfort. So if we relate it to men with pornography addiction or problematic pornography use or any problematic behavior, here's a discomfort or a tension or something that happens in the body. The body is stressed. In other words, the body is experiencing a stressed state. And then the mind starts figuring out, how do I get rid of this? How do I solve this? And then the mind goes to the thing that always works. And what always works? In the case of the study participants that I worked with, porn always works. So then that's what they're reaching for. But for other people, it may be a cigarette. It may be sugar. It may be wine. You get the picture. So every one of us has different coping mechanisms and coping strategies for this very universal experience of what I call the dance of avoidance. We're dancing around the void, this void of discomfort, and we're not looking inward and we're looking outward. We're constantly trying to find the solution out there. So when we meditate, everyone thinks that meditation or stillness is rainbows and butterflies and sunshine and peace and harmony. But the truth is that when we first start meditating and we become still, we actually have to face everything we've been avoiding. So that initial, I want to call acclimatization process, settling into the experience of meditation, isn't always comfortable. Because here come the emotions and the sensations that we've been avoiding. Here are the same emotions and sensations that trigger our automatic use of bad habits or substances, whatever it may be. And so meditation gives us this beautiful laboratory. It's like an experiment. It's a constant experiment where we're paying attention to what's happening here and noticing the impulse, and can I stay with it and observe it, which is the opposite of the subconscious reactivity. And so now we get to transform a reaction, because rather than it be a subconscious habitual reaction towards a behavior that we want to move away from, now it becomes a conscious choice to stay present. And in that choice, then we can choose something new. Everyone's heard the word responsibility. There's a reason why it's that word. It's the ability to respond. So when we are still and able to feel a stimulus, whether it's a sensation, emotion, a discomfort, a pain, whatever it may be, now we're able to choose a different path, right? So here's this conditioned nervous system reaction, whether it's, again, porn, whatever behavior we're talking about. And now we give ourselves the space through meditation to say, actually, there's a different way that I can choose. And what that looks like is different for every person. And I'm not here to say what that behavior or action or anything should be. That's the beautiful part. We all get to explore what makes sense for us within the context of our own lives.
Yeah. So, speaking about just feeling that avoidance and that stress within your body when you want to go to your vice, whatever it might be, and just sitting with it and not looking to act on that impulse. Because you are right. I do think that the word that you used beautifully was avoidance, right? We're all trying to avoid something at some point, and everybody has their own specific vice. And I think one thing I struggled with in meditation for myself is when people talk about meditation, it's like, oh, just all this clarity and you get all this wisdom and you can talk to your higher self. And I'm like, well, I've been trying to meditate now for like a year and a half, and every time I close my eyes and try to meditate, it is very scary. And I think it takes a lot of courage to just kind of sit there with your emotions or triggers or feelings and all that tension within you. But you did mention something that I'm curious about, where it's like after meditation and just choosing a different way of addressing that avoidance, is it picking up a healthier habit, or is it just letting that tension flow and pass through you without acting on it?
Right. That's a really beautiful question, and it's a question that I hear often. And I would say that we might hold the intention of holding this experience until it passes, right? We want to be able to ride it and then experience the other side of it, that it does end, because it's really helpful for the mind to have evidence that these experiences don't last forever. Because that's what we're scared of when we're feeling sad, depressed, angry, whatever it is. We don't really know for certain that there's an end to this experience. We're scared that this will last forever. And when we are allowed to, when we do sit and observe the end, we gather increasing data points of saying, actually, I know this ends. I know that I've heard the saying that all of these things come to pass, but when we start experiencing it, we actually believe those words. However, we also have to be compassionate with ourselves. We're not going to always going to be able to sit with the brunt, the intensity over the overwhelm of a really intense situation. So to give ourselves the permission and the compassionate permission to say, actually, I also have these resources and these practices that I can lean on, that I utilize, and I know that they're going to help my body feel better, and they're a gift to my body. Things like yoga, meditation, sauna, ice bath, exercise, walking, hiking, swimming, dancing. I think you get the picture. It's the gift of some kind of restorative practice or some kind of movement practice. These practices that we can collect become our safety valves when we need them. While at the same time, I do think that this requires almost like a moment-to-moment assessment for each individual, because I'm not going to say, okay, you should sit with it for 10 minutes, and then if it's not gone by 10 minutes, then you should do a practice. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, can you authentically and honestly look inward and say, I'm willing to sit with this, and then can you authentically and honestly say, or vulnerably say, I've sat with it, but I'm going to choose to now use a practice because no longer do I feel like I can comfortably hold this space, and to give yourself that freedom to choose. Because if we just do it unconsciously, what might happen is, here comes discomfort, and I'm going to go breathe, because I know that breath work makes it go away every time. So then we're sort of doing the avoidance pattern again. So rather than viewing the practice as a way of avoiding these experiences, these practices empower us to face the discomforts of everyday life with a little more clarity, with a little more presence, with a little more groundedness and stability. So we're less swayed by what happens out there, and we become more, again, grounded in our experience.
I suspect the people that choose to work with you have to reach a point of some sort of awareness and wanting to step into this practice, because I don't think this is something, just thinking about it, I don't think this is something someone can just like step into if they don't understand that they have some sort of trauma, or they're suffering from something, or want change. I feel like you would have to want to change yourself in order.
Well, there it is.
Yeah.
You've just nailed it. But that would be why I would call myself and every other helping professional in the world, we're agents of change. We're helping people change in the ways that we know how and we have expertise in. I would say that the fundamental commonality of those that come to me to help, firstly, want to change. And what I can say without a doubt, that change takes on 3 forms. There's only 3 questions that my clients are asking generally. A specific, it may sound different, but generally, they want to improve their health. They want to create authentic change. Obviously, they want to create authentic change in some specific realm. Or 3, they want peaceful relationships. And the answer to all 3 is pointing right here. It's always pointing right back into our body, not just ourselves, not our mind, here, into our heart and our body. But one thing that you did, one thing that is really important, that yes, you're hearing me speak about it in a very passionate, enthusiastic way. The thing about the work that we do as therapists and compassionate inquiry specifically, I'm a certified compassionate inquiry practitioner. It's Gabor Maté's psychotherapeutic approach. What they teach us and what we need to be is very client-centered and oriented. We have to trust the client's process, that they are exactly where they're at, and that is perfectly appropriate. This means that the words that I use to describe these processes are very different from client to client, because I have to assess where they're at. Some people may not be ready to come out of here, so I have to gently be here with them and then see what it's like for them to slowly come back in. And I have other clients where in a whole hour session, there's maybe 10 words spoken, because the whole time the client is processing an emotion or a feeling. So we're just staying present with their body. So it's, I can appreciate what you're saying, but I can also add to it that every person is different, and their understanding of what it means to connect to their body is going to be subtly different, if not really significantly different. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
suspect so. And to add to everything that we've been saying, I think obviously the underlying factors as to why people develop certain habits or struggle with, negative self-talk in the mind
Mhm.
comes from trauma and
Yes.
and
Yeah.
suffering, right? So I want to talk about that a little bit. What is trauma?
I I stray away from the just like addiction. I
Mm-hmm.
prefer to use, because addiction has a is infused with beliefs and negative
Mm-hmm.
connotations. I don't like the word because I think addiction is a universal experience. But if I say that
Yeah.
to someone, they're like, I'm not an addict.
Yeah.
And another way, the way I say it is, we're all avoiding something, and that to me is
Mm-hmm.
what addiction is. When I say trauma is a universal experience, people might be offended by that and say, no, nothing ever happened to me, or it might create a polarized opinion. For me, trauma is nothing more than a conditioned response or a conditioned reaction in our nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And every one of us have been conditioned since childhood. And what makes, for me, it's not about whether or not a person identifies as addicted or identifies as traumatized. It's that their conditioned reaction or their conditioned avoidance behavior,
Mm-hmm.
they no longer want it. So now what used to be a solution for something, because the only reason it was conditioned in our nervous system to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't happen by accident. The environment that we lived in put it there. In other words, it was an adaptation. And this is what Dr. Gabor Maté taught me. It was an adaptation. This means that it was protecting, serving its purpose, and all of a sudden one day there was a moment where this conscious mind of someone decided, you know what? I don't want that there anymore, because now it's causing more problems than it was solving. And this is also important. This means that all of the things that we're beating ourselves up about were once solutions to something else that we just didn't have an answer for then. And yet here we are judging ourselves for the thing that was protecting us this whole time. So, so I think you can get where I'm going with
So
this, that
true.
why are we judging ourselves for something that was inherently protecting us? And what does shaming and guilting ourselves do other than perpetuate the problem?
Mm.
And so this is an invitation for curiosity rather than judgment to say, okay, what is it that this thing is protecting me from that I'm not addressing? Because I can assure you, when we find the pain that we've been avoiding with the behavior that we're identifying as the problem, the behavior that we're identifying as a problem goes away because there's no
Mm.
longer a need or a purpose for it.
Mm.
Because we've attended to the deeper wound, the deeper processing within the body that was previously unattended.
Mm. That's so good. I love what you said there about um, not judging ourselves, like holding space for behaviors that we built or cultivated as a way to protect ourselves in the past, but now realizing they no longer serve us, and kind of holding um, compassion for that version of ourselves. Because I think shame is what perpetuates those behaviors. It's like a cycle. Like there's this shame, like, oh, I'm doing this thing again. I shouldn't be doing it. So you're running to it again because you're trying to escape from that feeling. It's a very crazy and unending cycle that a lot of people feel defeated and stuck in and don't know how to get out of.
Absolutely, Jimmy. I couldn't have said it better myself. That shame and guilt are the exact fuels that catalyze the next cycle. Let me ask you this, Jimmy.
Mm-hmm.
If someone walked up to you, tapped you on the shoulder, and you turned around and they looked you in the eyes and they said, I've been protecting you day in, day out, whether you knew it or not, I've been protecting you for decades. What would you say to someone that's been protecting you for that long? What's the first thing that you might say?
Thank you.
Yes. And what do we do instead to our protectors? We judge them. We beat
Yes.
ourselves up. And where thank you might be the only rational response, the only thing that makes sense to something that's been working unendingly, unceasingly to keep us safe. It's a form of protection that we may not need anymore,
Mm.
but it's still doing its job.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. That was a really, really good one. As you brought that question to me, I just kind of like saw my inner child or like a older version of myself, like kind of
Mm.
tapping me on the shoulder and saying that. So that was a very, that was a huge shift in my mind for sure.
Mm.
I
Let me
think
ask you this. Was it a
mhm,
shift in your body, though? How was it to say thank you? What happened in your body?
it felt like I put down some weights.
Yes. And that's the difference between judgment and gratitude.
Mm,
Because our body responds differently when we say thank you to ourselves than we beat ourselves up. And I can assure you that a body that is tense and fighting itself will continue down the same behavioral patterns that we're trying to move away from.
mhm.
And a body that becomes softer because we've thanked and given gratitude has a greater capacity to choose a different path, to choose freedom.
Yes. I just feel like there's been a lot of what's the word when things just seem to be synchronicities.
Aligned.
Yeah, aligned. Yeah, because I was having a conversation with my sister earlier today and just, a vulnerable moment here. And I was just like, I feel really burnt out. I don't know if
Mm,
I'm kind of a little bit depressed. Like I feel
mm,
so much gratitude for all of the things that I have in my life, but I just feel so exhausted mentally. It's not even a
mm,
physical exhaustion, it's a mental exhaustion. And, I kind of broke down crying to her. And as I was
mm,
talking to her, I was just kind of like, I think I've reached this point where I realized like I've been carrying this weight on my shoulders, like these thoughts that, I've had in the back of my head. They've become like a familiar friend. They're just always in the background, and
mm,
I'm constantly ruminating over them. And they're the reason why I have a lot of behaviors that I believe no longer serve me. And
mm.
I was like, over the last day and a half, it just felt like for once I kind of just gave myself a break from all of that.
Yes.
And I
Hmm.
was crying, and I was like, it kind of feels like I've been carrying like 20 tons on my back,
Mm,
and I've
mm,
become so used to it.
mm.
Like my body was numb carrying it, but as
Yeah.
soon as I put it down, all the exhaustion from carrying that weight with me, I'm feeling it all at once. And it was
Yeah.
just kind of, and again, having this conversation with you, it's like taking an additional layer, that
Mm,
thank you exercise that we just did. And yeah, it just feels like this weight has been like
mm,
lifted off my
mm.
shoulders. I'm exhausted, and I think I probably have to work through that exhaustion, but it just feels like a huge paradigm shift with what you were talking about, like getting out of my head and like settling in my body.
Yeah. Can I respond to that? Because you
Yes.
bring up some important things I'd love to. Firstly, acknowledge there are fewer things more potently powerful and therapeutic
Mm,
than a good cry and expressing vulnerably. There are very
mm,
few things. So the fact that your body was able to release that energy, I can completely understand that experience. And if anything, viewers and listeners should welcome those expressions when the body needs to release what it's been storing and holding.
mm,
Um, and the second thing is, this is a nice way of you can begin to cultivate that reconnection with the body and trusting the body's wisdom and again learning its language because you said a very interesting word. You said my body is so exhausted, right? And that's the language of the body. That's how it's
mm,
saying something. There's a message in there. So when we start to get out of our head and get into our body, we start listening to that experience. And so we ask ourselves, what does my body need when I'm exhausted? What does my body need in this moment? Because if I stick to my agenda and I stick
mm,
to my mind's intention, I know where this pathway leads. I'm going to be
mhm,
more exhausted. I'm going to be burnt out.
mhm,
So again, how do I respond if I know my body's trying to tell me something?
mhm,
What most people don't do is that they don't hear that message and they don't respond. Because if they continue choosing this pathway, exhaustion turns into symptoms, turns into sickness, turns into
mhm,
illness, turns into chronic disease if it's left unattended. Whereas if we learn how to connect to our body in those initial phases of distress signals, hey, my body's sore, even this muscle soreness or whatever it may be, my body's telling me something. How do
mm.
I respond? How do I listen?
Yes. Oh, what you said, I just want to snap. I think something I've become super conscious of over the last couple of years, and why I've been so passionate about my healing journey, is because I just don't I do believe that how we feel, our emotions are
Mm.
directly connected to our health and well-being, and
Yes.
are, can be a vessel for chronic illness which is
Yes.
something that I'm like, I don't want this to manifest in any way. I've seen when I've been super distressed and seen how it manifested in my body in ways that were just like, if this goes on any longer, this could become a serious problem for me. And, I see people who are dedicated to, eating well and exercising, which I believe it's all part of the holistic health process. But I kind of think that if you're doing all of that, but you have so much going on within you, and your spirit is, not relaxed, and your emotional body isn't centered, it's you're kind of canceling out the all the work that you're doing with eating healthy and working out.
Uh, Jimmy, you're pretty much identifying what it means to be Somawise, right?
Mm-hmm.
To listen to the wisdom of the body isn't just to rigidly stick to a exercise or diet plan because this is what I was told was healthy.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly what you mentioned is how is my body responding to these choices? How's my body responding overall? Is there because the body doesn't lie, right? So my mind will have a bunch of different stories and can have a bunch of different explanations about what's happening in the moment or why something is happening. And in fact, your mind will change its mind quite often, right? Quite often our mind is just all over the place. But what will never stop telling you the cold, hard truth is your body. Your
Mm-hmm.
body doesn't lie. It cannot lie. If it's tense, it's not going to be able to hide that tension. If there's agitation, it cannot hide that agitation. We might avoid it. We might dissociate from it. We might try to repress it or numb it, right? So a lot of us numb our experiences. But the body, and we can look at it one way. We can view it as a problem or we can view it as a blessing
Mm-hmm.
because the body is constantly, it will never stop trying to help you, to wake you up and say, look here, attend to this. There is self-care to be had. We can, people think that self-care is selfish, and I fully disagree. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to claim the quote until someone else does, but self-care is about giving the best of you, not what's left of you.
Mm-hmm.
And when we attend to ourselves and we attend to a body and then allow it to become tension free and relaxed, all of a sudden we have more space, more energy to give to others, to give to the projects, the clients, the family members, the children in our everyday life.
Yes. Oh, that was a bar. What I love what you said with the body doesn't lie.
Mm.
That's a really good one. That might be the title of this podcast episode. That was a really good one. And just to again drive this point home, I was listening to this woman give her account of a near death experience, and she had cancer, and it had metastasized, I can't say the word, all over her body, spread all over her body. And, the doctors were like, you have a couple of days to live. Um, so she had an episode where she died, and they were trying to resuscitate her. And in them trying to resuscitate her, she talked about crossing over to the other side. And while she was on Earth, she had a lot of issues and trauma in her relationship with her father. And her father had passed, but she was still holding all of that in her body. So in this near death experience, she sees her dad, they have a conversation. She releases all of that, comes back into her body
Mm.
because they stopped treatments, comes
Yeah.
back into her body. And within a couple of weeks, her cancer was completely gone,
Yeah.
like out of her body.
I'm not surprised by those. And this is what happens when we disconnect from the popular or prominent mainstream narrative that everything that happens to us is a physical experience, and it doesn't take into account and appreciate the spiritual, emotional experience that's happening with us beneath the rational, logical mind, that the mind doesn't, it can't make sense of it. And this is at the core of Dr. Mate's teachings with compassionate inquiry, where under the source, at the root of the trauma, the chronic illness, the disease, is an emotional wound that was never attended to. Um, when we talk about healing trauma, this is sort of how we can learn to differentiate or distinguish between the mind's role in the process versus the body's role in the process. I'm not going to say that positive thinking doesn't help, but the reason I call it the miracle of healing trauma is because the mind, that we can put the body in an environment of health and healing with a healthy diet, healthy movement, healthy sleep, healthy quality sleep. We can have the practices of meditation, cold exposure, sauna, whatever it may be. We can put our body and we can have our mind create an environment of healing, but at the end of the day, that last little bit, like sort of how you highlighted that near-death experience, something that the mind has no control over, something that's beyond the explanation of the mind, that's the body. Only the body can spontaneously heal. And anytime you have that spontaneous, random healing, that's a miracle because the mind can't explain it. So I think that when we say miracle, what we're doing is we're trusting a process. We're trusting that the body knows what it's doing. And the reason we can do that is since the beginning of life, when we were single-celled organisms, there was only one program. It was towards life, towards thriving, towards survival. And we've got trillions of these single cells doing the same exact function that it was programmed to do originally. So it doesn't matter what the mind is thinking. The body's sole impulse is to move towards healing and thriving. If anything, when the mind steps in too much, it actually stops the process and it gets in the way of the healing process. Can I share 3 examples? This might be. So here's 3 examples of the body healing but the mind not liking it. So Jumi, let me ask you this. What do you call it when the body gets hot, when you start getting sick? What is that called?
A fever.
Yes. Does your mind like having a fever?
No.
No, but yet it's therapeutic and healing for the body. What's another bodily function that involves maybe stuff coming out of the mouth? What is that one called?
Is that like when you have like a cough or something?
Like vomiting.
Yeah, like the phlegm. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so vomiting. Does
Yeah.
the mind like vomiting?
No, not at
No.
all.
And yet this is the body getting rid of toxins and stuff that's not good for it. And we all know when it comes out the other side, it's called diarrhea.
Yeah.
And the mind does not like that either. And here are 3 examples of normal bodily functions that the mind finds uncomfortable and yet are therapeutic. So if we can apply that to something like cold exposure or breathwork or meditation, as you described it, meditation being this uncomfortable process, here's the body processing something uncomfortable and the mind says, hell no, I'm not doing this, I'm out of here, no way. And yet for the body's like, why are you interrupting this? I need to do this. I need to heal. We're constantly consuming information, stimulation, social media. When we sit down to process that with meditation, as an example, it's not a comfortable process to digest all that, but yet we have to or we're going to get clogged up, backed up, and sick.
Yeah. Oh, I love that analogy. I love that analogy so much because you're right. When we throw up or when we have a fever, that's the body trying to heal itself, and we're just like we try to resist that so much, stopping that process. Same thing with meditation. When those negative feelings arise, we want to shut it down, push it back in, and that doesn't do anything for us. It just causes us to continue to suffer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well,
Beautiful summary.
I want to ask, in all your practice and stuff, do you ever think like why we suffer so much, like why human beings suffer so much, and what the purpose of suffering is?
Ooh. Well, okay, that's 2 different questions, and hold me accountable so that I can answer both.
Okay.
I think that why we suffer is we disconnect from ourselves. So, and yet that disconnection, maybe I'll be able to answer both questions in that single answer. We disconnect from ourselves, which means we're disconnecting from our intuition. You beautifully described it at the beginning of this podcast, where you said you intuitively felt that there was something missing from this equation. So I believe that there is we forget about the importance of our intuitive sense, that there's a lot of wisdom in our body that we're not listening to. And when we disconnect from that and we rely on the contents of our mind for survival, for thriving, for solving problems, it's a very limited, disconnected way of being. And again, when we are in our mind, we're not actually engaging with the real world. We're engaging with our imagination. So we're not dealing with things that are real. And again, if you want to build on that, when we react to our fear-based thoughts that aren't real, what do we do as a result when we keep reacting to those thoughts?
We just like go to our vices.
Yes, and we make them real.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yes. So when we react to a situation as if we're scared of it, we actually react with that in our mind, and we start creating the circumstances that make our worst
Mm.
case scenarios real.
Yeah.
And yet here's this process that can be self-destructive, that can be quite painful, and there's a lot of suffering involved. And yet, and this is maybe just my personal way of creating meaning out of it, because I'm going to tell you a story of my mind. You don't have to
Yeah.
believe my story, but it's a
Yeah.
story that works for me.
Mm.
My story is that we all have to go through this journey because we're born this beautiful, limitless, boundless potential as a child. And then we get this conditioning put on top of us, conditioning from our parents, from our peers, from our school, from culture, from popular media, from religion, from everything. Everything is just creating our box of who we are. And we need that box in order to survive in a world that's primarily mental. Like, this is a mind-based world we live in.
Mm.
And yet we need that process to then find ourselves, because it's when we feel that, as you called it, that intuitive sense that there's something more, when we feel the calling to break down the perceptual walls that have built around us, that's where we come back to that childlike state of curiosity, of openness, but we come back with wisdom,
Mm.
because we come back with the lessons learned from the pain and suffering.
Yeah.
So Muji talks about it
Mm-hmm.
in the video, in the documentary that you watched, that
Yeah.
when I went to visit him in Portugal. Pain and suffering are necessary for growth,
Yeah.
because we don't stop and reflect when things are good. If we're enjoying life, we don't stop and say, wait a second, why are things so amazing right now? We don't do that. No, but when things are crap, when things are going really shitty, then we start paying attention, saying, why am I feeling this way? What's
Mm.
going on? So it's actually the pain that triggers a reflective process that keeps urging us and inviting us to come back and say, what's actually happening here? What is here for me to learn, for me to heal?
Yes, yes, that's so good. I 100% agree with you. I personally believe that suffering is a function of our human existence in order for us to grow, and kind of learn to have more compassion for ourselves so that we can be more empathetic and compassionate and loving to other people. I think that's all part of it. But this was such a great conversation. I mean, this so many gems. So like this is so wonderful. I'm learning so much more about somatic therapy, and definitely something I'm personally going to look into further myself to help with my healing journey. But before I let you go, this podcast is called A Word to the Wise. So I always ask all of my guests for final words of wisdom to the listeners. It could be about everything we've been talking about, or something completely different that you kind of keep in your back pocket as you go through life.
I'm just gonna quote the cover of my own book, and I'm gonna just say, get out of your head, get into your body.
Mm.
Right. So to me, that's where real life is lived, when we come out of the imagination and come into the real embodied experience of life, of your life, of our specific unique life.
Yes, yes, for sure. Where can people find you?
So Somawise, the book, is available on Amazon, and Somawise Online, the programs and the retreats and the therapies that I do they could be viewed at my website, lukesniewski.com.
Awesome. I'm going to leave the details for your book and your website in the show notes for the listeners. So thank you so much
Fantastic.
for stopping by the podcast.
Jimmy, thank you so much for having me. It was a absolutely wonderful conversation. Thank you.